G'day, I'm Troy.
And I'm Brian.
And we're the hosts of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist, an ex-evangelical podcast.
We used to be loyal members and leaders in Australian Christian megachurches, but we're not anymore.
I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist is an honest and hilarious peek behind the curtain at the weird, the worrying, and sometimes traumatic world of evangelicals and Pentecostals.
We share our stories, we interview prominent guests in the global ex-evangelical space, and provide a platform for others to tell their stories about their time in evangelicalism and their journey out.
Shortlisted at the recent Australian Podcast Awards, I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist gives you a unique global perspective into one of the fastest growing religions in the world from the people who actually lived it.
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and iwasateenagefundamentalist.com.
Episode 101, William Gretton. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, we chat with Christian listener William Gretton. William contacted us after hearing me in conversation with Mike De Virgilio on the podcast Unbelievable. Andrew and I enjoyed this conversation, and it is the kind of conversation we would like to have more often. If you are a Christian listening to this and would like a similar conversation, please get in touch. Contact details are in the show notes. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. Andrew is back with me. He had a sulk with me for an episode, was it 1 or 2 episodes ago, and I had to drag David kicking and screaming in, but we've resolved all of that. Andrew thinks I'm cool again now. Hello, Andrew. How are you? Uncool. I missed you.
You are never uncool.
Oh, thank you.
So they may know. I don't know if you said anything about it during the show, but I was out working on that whole new business thing, and I really wanted to be present for that show, but I appreciate that David stepped in and carried on. And thank you, as always, for making Still Unbelievable work.
Thank you. And you missed my big news, because the last one with David, I introduced it as being recorded on the day of the big event that is Eurovision, which was a week after the big event that was the coronation. But I had an even bigger event to announce, and that was that I have been in a music video.
No way.
And that was a more enthusiastic response than I got from David. So,
so that can be a pretty big deal. So, what did you do in the video? Were you just an extra, or did you?
I did what I do best. I sat at a bar doing nothing.
Oh, okay. Well, you held down what role I would play.
that was and. Yes, so our listeners have probably already gone onto YouTube and searched for the Green Brick Pub, I think that's what it's called, and watched the music video and found the 5 seconds that I am in shot and sat there, not even holding a pint of beer, just looking at it on the bar. But I am wearing a hat, so that's all that matters. Right. Now, we've got something even more important than that. We have a guest. Not only that, it's not a guest that I've had to chase down for weeks until they eventually succumb and say, all right, I'll come on your podcast. We've had a guest that's contacted us. Welcome, William. Welcome on to Still Unbelievable. Great pleasure to have you, sir. Tell us about yourself and why did you email us?
Right. Where shall I start?
Oh, he's got a list.
It's never good when it starts that way.
I'm a seasoned listener to Justin's Unbelievable podcast. I guess I was listening to it soon after it became a podcast. I came across yours, I think, after you'd been on with Justin. One of the very first podcasts of yours, Still Unbelievable, that I listened to, Andrew was telling how he'd been to a local park and met a lady from, I think, Eastern Europe, who'd offered to pray for him and put her hand on his eyeball or something like that. I thought
this is all true. Yes,
I thought this is interesting. I've got to follow this one up. And of course, since then, I've listened to a lot of them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm glad we haven't put you off, because I'll be honest, I have had contact from some people who have been put off by the style of some of our content, because we can be a bit scratchy at times. We don't shy away from that, but we do like to try to treat our guests a lot better than when we're talking solo. So thank you for coming on. And Andrew loves telling that story. I love hearing that story, and I'm really intrigued by what the detail of what fascinated you about that story.
Well, I was just new to you two.
Right.
It took me a little while to realise that you were atheists to start with. You know,
Okay.
you just break into a conversation and you wonder what people have got motivating them and so on. And yes, that was interesting. And it was quite a nice introduction, because it was done sort of partly humorously and partly seriously. And yeah, it sort of got me hooked. But since then, I've listened to lots of your podcasts. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, because we're on the downslope to episode 100, although in fact this one might be over the threshold. I haven't really worked out the exact order yet, but I suspect that this one will be 100 and something, but I can't give you a number just yet. So, Andrew, how do you feel about that?
We leave that to other podcasts. We don't count. We just leave that to other shows.
I know. I was listening to I've caught up with another podcast this past week, which I've been listening to, and they do seasons. They've had multiple seasons of their podcast within one calendar year, and I'm thinking, how do you do that? Why do you even draw the boundary? What's the difference? You know, I mean, how would we break our episodes down into seasons, Andrew? I mean, we're still on season 1, episode 90 something as it stands. I mean, when do we make a break for season 2?
Look, I don't know how that's done. It's one of these things that you do see out of podcasts that have some sort of professional organization behind them, like NPR. I'm guessing the BBC has some podcasts that perhaps are run in seasons, but I have no idea how that's done. And David Johnson over at Skeptics and Seekers, he claims to have seasons, but I've never seen him take a break. And so when I think of seasons, I think of a show that takes a break. And I don't know how any of that's done, man.
It's because we haven't had a big explosion. That's what it is. Every season finale has a big explosion. So that's what it is. So your story attracted a listener, Andrew.
Well, completely unexpected. But I will say, William, that it was a bit of an unnerving experience, in the sense that people in the United States, we have a strong sense of personal distance, right? Sort of that 2 to 3 foot mark. Anything inside that boundary is inside someone's personal space. I know not every culture has the same ideals about personal space, but in the United States, we tend to stand 2 or 3 feet apart in public and with people we don't know. And I was perfectly happy to let that very nice lady pray for me. But when she touched me, I will confess that I was pretty unnerved. That was not what I was expecting. And I didn't flinch or say anything negative, but I was surprised, because it's not the kind of thing that people typically do in the U.S. when we're meeting strangers. So, it's a little unnerving. It's a little unnerving. She's a nice lady, though.
So, Andrew, I can't remember from what we've talked about your church tradition. Was there a culture of praying for healing in the church tradition you grew up?
Oh, no. In fact, we did not accept that modern miracles existed because of apostolic authority versus apostolic succession. So the idea in the Church of Christ was that the apostles had the ability to convey spiritual gifts through the laying on of hands. Once the perfect Bible had come into being And by that, we only meant that all of the revelation that was going to be offered in the first century had completed, which is roughly around the time of the death of the last disciple who would have been touched by an apostle to have spiritual gifts. At that time, we felt like miraculous spiritual gifts ended. And so, I mean, you could certainly pray for healing, but it wasn't going to happen. Right. There's no modern spiritual gifts in the sense that you would read 1 Corinthians 12 or 13 or 14.
Sorry, William, I think I interrupted you. You were going to ask something.
No, I think I was just going to say that we all have our individual stories. And so one reason I contacted you is I thought you might be interested in my story. Not out of my ego, but it might be a variation on some of the other stories and some of the assumptions that you make about people. And also, I really wanted to challenge some of you atheists about your, I think you call it naturalism. I might call it physicalism. Okay. So I'm hoping we'll get onto that at some point.
Let's move on to that, because I think the listeners have heard enough about us. They know what we sound like. So tell us a little bit about your story, William.
Okay, so I was born in 1944 into a fundamentalist evangelical Christian family. My father actually was a conscientious objector to war. He had to appear before a tribunal and argue his case as to why he shouldn't be required to enlist. I think obviously they believed him because he didn't go to jail, as some of his friends did who took the same line.
Wow.
But it was purely on Christian grounds, which was Jesus and the instructions to love your enemies, etc., etc. So as a young child, I was thoroughly indoctrinated into the Christian faith. And I'm not using the word indoctrinated pejoratively. I just mean they taught me, and it was important to them to instill a belief in Jesus into me. They felt it was their duty. And when I was 8 years of age, I actually responded to a call to go out to the front in a Pentecostal church in Nottingham and give my heart to Jesus. And as a young child, I simply absorbed everything that my parents taught me. I can even remember little incidents that shows how, what shall we say, what's the word that you use when you talk about young children? Impressionable, that's the word. So when I was about 5, I said to my mum, Mummy, what will we be doing when Jesus comes back? And she said, we shall reign with him. And I remember this image coming into my mind. I imagined me and my family and people from church hovering somewhere above the clouds with raindrops coming out the ends of our fingers. Well, what does a 5-year-old know about the word rain? We shall reign with him. Oh, that's how rain happens. Yeah. We'll be dropping rain out of our fingers along with Jesus. And I ought to mention this one. So the obvious question a 5-year-old might ask is, Mummy, where do babies come from? And she said they come from the doctor. And I obviously the next question I would ask after that is, well, where does the doctor get them from? And she said, from God. And at that point, I had to assume that all doctors would be Christians, would certainly believe in God, because they were getting these babies coming to them to give to mums, you know. So, as a young child, I took it all in. And at age 8, I actually went out to make that commitment. Now, age 10, something fairly dramatic started to happen. Age 10, I became interested in astronomy and space travel. And I'm a lifelong amateur astronomer. I have an observatory in my garden and so on. I'm quite active in that. And suddenly appreciating the vastness of space, I had this image that kept haunting my mind. This image of a spacecraft, a spaceship, traveling away from the Earth into the blackness of space and going on and on. And I suddenly started to think, well, where's heaven? Where's God? Is God really there at all? And it was a shattering sort of thought when I got my head around it. And obviously the thing I should have done would be to talk to my parents about it, but I couldn't possibly do that because I somehow thought they'd be horrified. I'd be letting them down because I was supposed to believe in Jesus and so on. And so I kept it bottled up. But of course, there was also painful doubt about that because I knew I'd been taught that people who didn't believe in Jesus would go to hell. And, so that was quite a traumatic time. And what's going to follow is, as I say, everybody's story is different. How I found a faith that has been able to sustain me and is different a story from you two gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Matthew's a gentleman. I'm not sure that I am.
Okay, so if you want me to go on, I will say
Please.
That throughout my life, I've always attended evangelical churches. I love the fellowship, the community, the many friends that we make. And but I've also analysed the evangelical mindset, and to an evangelical, faith is the same as certainty. To say that you believe in something to do with the Lord means that you are certain you know it. Faith equals certainty. Belief equals knowing. And for a long time, I thought there's something wrong about me. I don't have that sort of assurance. And we moved around to different cities to do with my job over the years. And so whenever we went to settled in a new church, at some point I'd be getting alongside one of the pastors or elders or some professional to do with the church and talking over with them my problem with certainty. And they would pray for me and all sorts of things like that. But I never seemed to get to that point of certainty. And I've come over the years to recognize that evangelicals have a particular kind of, well, I call it brain wiring. Their brains are wired for certainty. And I have to accept that I'm different from that, and probably the majority of human beings are. Our brains aren't wired for absolute certainty. Absolute certainty is definitely a characteristic of fundamentalist religion, not just Christianity, but others, such as people who would strap explosives to their waists and go into a crowd of people and detonate them with the absolute certainty that they were pleasing their God. It takes a lot of certainty to be willing to do that. I really had to come to terms with my own psychology and not to beat myself up, thinking that because I didn't have certainty in the way that evangelicals do, I was somehow inferior or a reject or something like that. Do you want to make any comment?
Thank you, Ian. That's devastatingly honest of you, and I love it. And I certainly engage with some of the latter bits that you've said, and because I come from my upbringing was in the missionary world in Central Africa, in Zambia, and very fundamentalists, very young earth, and I remember certainty being a big feature of my upbringing. And when it came to the point of doubting my faith and going through the process that we now call deconstruction, it's that unpacking of the certainty that I had in Christianity and working out what to replace that with, or to readjust the old certainty with a new, initially uncomfortable not knowing fully. And I'm now comfortable not knowing fully. And I think it's wonderful not to know fully, because that is how the world works. We don't know fully, and some things we may never know fully. And I think to take confidence and move with certainty because a belief requires it, I think is a very dangerous place to go. And certainly for me, that was devastating for my faith. And that mental unpacking and transitioning from a place of certainty to a place of being comfortable in uncertainty was a very difficult process for me to go through. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that.
There came a time, actually, just another incident. A professor at Nottingham University lent me a book by William Temple. Now, he was Archbishop of Canterbury when I was born, and in fact he died the same year, 1944, that I was born. And this book is called Nature, Man and God, and later in a second-hand bookshop in Keswick I managed to locate a copy and purchase it for myself. And it was a compilation of William Temple's Gifford lectures of the 1930s. And knowing that Temple was an intellectual, a man of deep thinking and so on, somebody asked him, I think it was a lady, somebody asked him how he could every week recite the creed, I believe in this, I believe in that, and so on. Was it intellectually honest for him to do that? And his reply was, when we recite the creed, we commit ourselves to living as if these things are true. And I came to see that that's what faith really is. It's not giving your assent to certain propositions. It is living as if certain things are true. Now, in the sort of churches that I go to, we don't recite creeds, but we can still live as if certain things are true, as if life has intrinsic meaning, as if there's a loving purpose behind the universe, as if there's objective right and wrong, and as if the Christian story, which is absolutely incomparable, of Jesus being the presence of God in this world, on this earth, we can live as if that is true. And living as if it's true doesn't mean denying it. It simply means that we're not necessarily absolutely certain of everything, but we're prepared to commit ourselves to that story, to that set of beliefs, and live in accordance with them as if that is the truth. And I think over the years, if you live like that, some things will ring true. They will ring true, not because you've intellectually proved them, but because you're living according to those principles.
I understand what you're saying. I think this is where we've got to the first point where where we can potentially disagree, because I'm uncomfortable with that as a process. If we're not sure that something is true, why would I want to commit to living as though it were? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think faith is like a love affair. The loveliest Christians I've met and whose lives I've admired couldn't necessarily give you an intellectual argument for God, but their relation to God is of the nature of a love affair. So it is not an action of the intellect, but of the emotions.
Yeah.
And although intellect is very important, so are emotions. Can I tell you what? Right, I've got two sorts of religious experience that I'd like to mention.
Okay.
And they flow out of what I've said already. So I've discovered over the years that one of the worst things that you can do personally is to feel sorry for yourself. And the antidote to feeling sorry for yourself is to have gratitude. Okay, there are people in the world who are in far worse situations than me, who I could completely understand they would feel sorry for themselves. I'm reasonably comfortable off. But even across the West, there are so many people who feel sorry for themselves. Depression is a terrible scourge, even across the West, where we're relatively affluent. The antidote to self-pity is gratitude. And gratitude is so powerful. It's such a powerful thing in my life, gratitude, to say thank you. I don't say many prayers. Nearly all of them are thank you. Now, let's just try and think of an example. Something I could be thankful for. My genes, beginning with G, my genes. So, I could be quite depressed about some of my genes because I've always been skinny. I've not been one of them big muscular alpha male types. I've seldom been much above 9 stone all my life. And back in primary school, I got bullied and knocked about because they called me a weakling and so on. On the other hand, I've lived to relative old age. I say I'm 80 at my next birthday without any serious illness. I don't take any medication. And so there must be something good about my genes, I think, that's gone. While I can be thankful for my genes, I can't be thankful to my genes. I'm thankful to something beyond the physical. So there's a starting point for defining what I mean as God. God is that to which ultimately I am thankful. And it's the most powerful aspect of my faith to be thankful and to direct that thankfulness towards that ultimate, which we call God.
One of the first things that pops into mind is probably the pretty typical skeptical question: Are emotions a good roadmap to those things that are true or likely true? And the obvious reason for the question is, if emotions are not a particularly good roadmap to lead us to things that are true or likely true, why would expressing an emotion toward any version of God, be it the Judeo-Christian God or the Islamic God or Buddhism or whatever, if emotions aren't a good guide to that which is true or likely true, it would say something about expressing thankfulness to a God.
Right. Okay, there is empirical truth. There is scientific truth. I love science. I've been devoted to it in my work all my life. I was a lecturer in chemistry after doing my PhD. I think science has done so much for humanity. It's done more to make our lives comfortable and healthy than all the rituals of all the religions down the ages. Mm-hmm. But it isn't everything. The life of man is more than just intellect.
So you and I agree there. The life of man is more than just intellect. In the way that I see this question, I'm not necessarily appealing strictly to the scientific method, right? Though I know that the question can be heard that way. My first part of the question is, are emotions generally a good guide to that which is true or likely true? I think the answer to that is probably no. So with that as the case, from my perspective, then what do I try to use to assess those things that are true or likely true? Now it starts to sound more like, well, now Andrew's just appealing to the scientific method, right? But I think you and I agree, or at least the way I heard you, don't let me put words in your mouth, so push back whenever you need to. There are truths that are independent of mind. And so I think my question would be, if we take emotion out of the mix and try to find some evidence independent of mind that a God exists, what would that be?
Oh, all right. Is that a question?
A very poorly worded one.
It's all right. Actually, I think you've heard of Søren Kierkegaard. He was the Danish philosopher who basically founded what's the word I want? Existentialism, right? Although he was a Christian, actually, and later existentialists were not Christians. But Søren Kierkegaard, and he said that life was too short, that we could, at a leisurely pace, consider all the possibilities of all the earth's philosophies and religions and come to some decision based on which one we want to follow. He said we had to dive in. What's the word he used? He's obviously in Danish, but we had to take what we call a leap of faith. And the leap of faith that Søren Kierkegaard took was into Christ, interestingly, even though he was, I guess, probably as skeptical as any of us are, in a sense, not being certain of things. But he said, in the short span of human life, you've got to make a decision to take a plunge into something and follow that. And I don't have the leisure, being nearly 80, to study of all the earth's philosophies and all the earth's religions. And I freely admit that I'm a follower of Christ because that was instilled into me when I was a child. But I found it rings true. It is consistencies that not wholly to do with my intellect, but as I say, also to do with my emotions.
So you think Kierkegaard would agree that the evidence that I'm talking about, independent of mind, doesn't exist, at least isn't present enough such that there's room for a leap of faith, that you have to take that sort of leap of faith?
It's a little bit of a difficult concept that you're saying, evidence independent of mind. Evidence requires mind to weigh it up, doesn't it? What would it be evidence of if there was no mind considering it?
No, that's fair. So let me fill that out a little bit. So I agree that objectivity is something that we weigh individually. However, independent of mind, I take to mean that it is something that rational minds can all conclude reasonably to be the same, right? So you were and are an organic chemist. And I recognize that there are things in organic chemistry that are probably bones of contention among professional organic chemists. However, there are also things about organic chemistry that must reasonably be agreed upon by professionals to even have a field of organic chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I am saying is, if there is a God, and that God is a personal God that wants a relationship with all of us, and it is the case that it is better for us at any point to be in a relationship with that God than out of a relationship with that God. So you may recognize some of this from sort of fundamental evangelical thought, right? If it is the case that this God exists and wants a relationship with us, what is the basis on which we can all agree that God exists? In the same way that we would have a foundation, say, for professional organic chemists, except that it would have to be something much more fundamental, because it's actually something for all of us, right? It's something that any reasonable person can look at and say, oh, well, right, there's the evidence for that God.
So I'm into the business of discovering God, and one discovery I've made is the value of thankfulness, and I am thankful to that ultimate, and that ultimate can't just be an impersonal force, otherwise I might as well just be thankful to my genes. That God to which I'm thankful has consciousness and personality. Otherwise, I couldn't express thanks towards he or she or it.
So what personality? That's really interesting. We might be getting somewhere. Matthew, interrupt me anytime.
No, go ahead. We're on your pathway now, so go for it.
What personality does this God have? Help me get to where you are.
That personality meant well by creating the universe and is a lover.
I think that's probably the issue that Andrew and I will have at first, is because you're talking about, I understand the concept of what you're saying is that we can't be thankful to our genes, we can only be thankful for our genes. I get that, and I understand that. The break for me is I'm unconvinced that there's a point of being thankful to. I can't even make that leap, because I can certainly be thankful for my genes. There are certain, I can look at other people who've got terrible genetic disorders, people that I know, and I can certainly, without wanting to sound like a horrible person, I can be thankful that I don't have that. But I don't see why or where the benefit is of moving from that point of thanks to extending it to being thankful to an entity for giving them to me. Because as soon as I attribute thankfulness to an entity for making me like me, I am tacitly also saying thank you to that entity for giving somebody else something that I don't want. And if that's a personal entity or an entity with characteristics, an entity that can communicate and commune, then that is an entity that while willfully giving me the healthy body I've got, that same entity has given somebody else the unhealthy body that they've got. And I don't see any reason for being thankful to that entity for that. So I'm skirting around the borderline of the problem of evil here. So that's the pathway that kind of thankfulness takes me down. Then that's before we start talking about evidence and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, that is an expression of the basic argument against the existence of a good God, and that is the existence of evil and suffering. I don't have an answer. I honestly don't. And I know many people have turned away from believing in God for that reason. Even, for example, Bart Ehrman, with all his New Testament studies and so on, still says that he had to turn away from believing in God because of the existence of evil. And I'm not going to be able to solve that problem because the biggest minds haven't. But it doesn't stop me being thankful to God.
Would there be something, William, my sincere apologies for how trite this is going to sound. I don't mean it to sound as trite as it's going to sound. Is there something that could overcome the amount of faith that you have today? Feel free to say, Andrew, I don't feel like answering that, and we can walk away from it. Because I realize it puts you in the sort of corner that I don't want you to, I just wonder, could something stop you from believing?
I don't think so. I know there's no pleasure in old age as your body wears out and your aches and pains come on, but I don't foresee anything like that turning me away from God.
Well, that's fair, because on the flip side, we have said on this show, at least I have, I think you have, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I've said I'm not sure what could make me believe, at some point in the future. It's not impossible in the cosmic oatmeal cookie sense that something could make me believe. The question is, could it make me believe for good reason? And that's sort of the conceit of Still Unbelievable, is what is a good reason to believe? And I'm still there. I see that your faith makes you happy, and I wouldn't take that away from you. I wouldn't take it away from you. But I'm looking for a good reason to believe. And maybe we'll find it by the end of the show.
Okay. A quick word on Bart Ehrman, William. Our listeners will have already heard it by the time they're listening to us now. But for you, we have actually got in the can an episode with Bart Ehrman. We've recorded it. I need to edit it, and it will be one of the upcoming episodes, but it will come out before this conversation gets published. We're talking about his latest book, Armageddon, so it's about Revelation. So we don't touch on the problem that you've just mentioned, but we have a conversation with Bart Ehrman coming up.
All right. Okay. I look forward to that.
But on the problem of evil and and the good God versus bad God, I think it's Stephen Law, the philosopher, who posits the evil God hypothesis, which I am rather partial to be quite honest. My exit from Christianity was a scientific evidential exit. It was the unwinding of my young earth creationist beliefs and the science of that, and then trying to find God from my new appreciation of the science of evolution. And it was that got me out of Christianity. But the barrier to me going back is this problem of evil that we've just encircled. I find it extremely problematic, because over the years I've come to the conclusion that Stephen Law has come to, that if there is a God, it can't be a good God. It has to be an evil God, because only an evil God would willfully create some of the atrocities that we see around the world. And an evil God is consistent with atrocities and occasional good, but I don't see how a good God can be consistent with occasional good and lots of atrocity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've heard the argument before. An evil God couldn't be consistent with occasional. Sorry, an evil God couldn't be consistent with occasional good. Is that what you said?
No, I'm saying an evil God is consistent with occasional good, but a good God isn't.
How do you work that out?
Because by having some people suffer, if everybody suffers and everybody's equal, but if some people suffer and some people don't, then you've created more suffering because you've got inequality on top of everything.
Maybe God isn't engineering the world in the way that you're implying by that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a really interesting break between the two of you, if you'll allow me to moderate the two of you for a moment. Maybe God isn't engineering the world in the way Matthew suggests, but then in what sense is a good God moderating the world if it's not in the sense that Matthew would mean by good?
You might need to rephrase, Andrew.
Okay, no problem. So in what sense is the God that you worship good if he has engineered the world that we live in?
There's the difficulty of the counter case that if there was no good God, how bad would the world be? What we're trying to do is compare the present world, which I say was created by God, with a universe that you believe in that wasn't created by God. Mm-hmm. But from my point of view, if there was no God, what would that universe be like? Would it be just like this one, or would it be far worse?
I guess it's down to perspective, but yes, the obvious answer is I would expect exactly the universe that we see, because I don't accept the hand of God in anything that we see. Because you made reference to the appearance on Unbelievable. One of the things I said on the episode I had with Mike on Justin's show at Unbelievable was I don't see around me anything that convinces me that there's a God, which is why I don't accept any of the past claims of evidence for God either, because I just don't see it around me. So yes, I look around and I see a universe that I interpret as having exactly the properties that would have if it arose naturally via an evolutionary process over billions of years.
Let me just say, Matthew, that I haven't come onto this conversation with the intention of convincing you or persuading you to believe in God. In a way, nothing's further from my mind. I'm really enjoying a conversation like this. I wanted to express the value of thankfulness.
Okay.
And I've got some more religious experience to talk about, if you're willing to listen to that. And then I want to go on with this criticism of physicalism. So
sure, let's move on to that. So yes, give us one of your stories, because you've heard of Andrew's story, and both of our doubts regarding that. So by all means do that. And yeah, naturalism and physicalism is definitely something that we're interested to talk about.
I would say that there are experiences of transcendence that hint of the existence of God and turn me in that direction. For example, when I'm in the concert hall listening to Sibelius or Vaughan Williams or Elgar or Beethoven or Brahms, that music is an experience that lifts up my mind, that transports me somehow into a transcendent realm. And it's the most wonderful experience. And to me, it puts me in touch with God. more so than any church rock band could do. It moves me, and yet so many people in the atheist community would say that music and that experience is just the jiggling of atoms. That music is nothing more than a sequence of pitched sounds. Mm-hmm. And my appreciation of it is nothing more than electrons and ions and molecules and electric flow in my brain. Mm-hmm. It's what some people call nothing buttery.
And I guess the question I would want to ask then, William, because Andrew and I both have responses to that, but the question I wonder is, what is it about classical music? I certainly get the talent behind it. I'm in no way would I ever criticize that. But what is it about the music that gets you to be in touch with your God?
It lifts me up in awe and directs my thoughts to something beyond what I'm seeing. It's very hard to explain.
You've talked about a transcendent moment. I have those moments where I'm sort of on a high, where I feel better connected to the world around me. That thought about transcendence, these transcendent moments, implies that there are non-transcendent moments. And you said, well, atheists and skeptics attribute this to atoms and ions and, to synapses, that sort of thing. I agree that we do. So I guess my question in short would be, in your non-transcendent moments, are you saying, well, yeah, I agree that I have non-transcendent moments that are completely within my brain, but I have these non-transcendent moments. I have these transcendent moments where I'm connected to God, and that can't be attributed to electrons and synapses and that sort of thing. Because if that is the case, it seems that ought to be something that we can test for.
Okay, so, right. I could probably find many examples in the output from atheists, but I'm going to choose one because I happened to come across it yesterday. So it's your Still Unbelievable podcast. It's episode 47, and it's at 25 minutes and 19 seconds. And it was part of a confrontation between a number of atheists and a number of Christians arguing it out. And one of the people on your side, his name is Darren.
Yes, we know Darren. Yeah.
What's his surname? Is it Luke?
Lute.
With
a T.
L-U-T-E.
Right. So now I'm going to quote from Darren word for word. So this is what he said. We know what feelings are, right? They're chemical processes in the brain. So we know what those are. Now that to me is just a statement of dogma. I don't know how that can be logically supported. I know for sure that there's a correlation between brain states and personal conscious experiences, but one is not the other.
So I agree, but the correlation works in both ways, doesn't it? So there's a correlation of brain states to feelings, but there's also the other side of that. As far as we know, without brain states, there are no feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and by the way, Darren, I know him reasonably well. He would say that this idea of correlation that you're talking about is strong from both sides. The obvious question then is, get me to transcendence without brain state, because that was actually the question that I was circling around a moment ago. In your non-transcendent moments, do you have brain states that account for your feelings? And if so, how do you say that in your transcendent moments, that's outside the possibility of your brain states?
Well, let me make it clear. If, for example, somebody could see the state of every particle in my brain, say when I'm feeling sad, and then at some later state of time, later stage, they could look into those brain states again and find they were just the same as when I was sad, they would say, hey, look, William's sad now, and they'd be perfectly correct, because there's such a tight correlation between brain states and conscious feelings, but they're not the same thing.
So still trying to get me to transcendence is outside the brain. I know that you believe that.
I didn't say it was outside the brain. I fully accept that my feelings of transcendence have a correlate in the state of my brain cells.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I misunderstood something that you said, and I see where I went wrong. This is a problem on my part and not a problem on your part. So here's where I went wrong. You said that in transcendent moments you feel closer to God, or words to that effect. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but words to that effect. And so because I was guessing without asking that you would have accepted the traditional Christian position of dualism, right? That there's a God that doesn't exist in the physical world in the same way that you and I do, right? So there's some dualist component. There's a physical us and a spiritual us that goes on after death, right? So by transcendence, when I hear that word used most often, it is an appeal to that non-physical self. And so when you said you felt moments of transcendence, you were more connected to God, you were actually appealing to a non-physical self. And I think I just painted you with that brush without us going through it.
All right. So when we talk about conscious experience in the English language, we tend to use the expression what it's like. Personal conscious experience, if you like, is what it's likeness. So there's something that it's like to, say, score the winning goal in a cup final. Or there's something that it's like to be jumping out of a plane with a parachute that's about to open and you're going to do a skydive. There's something that it's like. Okay. Now, let's do a thought experiment. There's something that it's like to give birth to a baby. So let's imagine that a woman giving birth, her brain could be scanned in every detail and displayed on a massive screen, maybe half the size of the solar system, every atom, every molecule, every electron, every flow of electrons over a period of nanoseconds or something like that, that would be the state of her, represent the state of her brain at the moment that she's given birth. If I could see all those symbols on that big screen and follow all of them, would that tell me what it's like to be giving birth?
It's an interesting, I've encountered this before, and I think it's an interesting thought experiment. But I think there's a problem in language here that doesn't trouble me like it troubles other people. So in the English language, we have two things. We have something called simile and something called metaphor, right? And so simile is when we use the words like or as by way of comparison. And metaphor is making that same statement but without the like or as. Okay. So So I agree that there is something that it is like to give birth to a child, though obviously it's not something I can do. But so there is something that it's like, but there is also something that it is. And in order to get those initial brain states that you were talking about, sort of on the cosmic whiteboard, right? It has to be a pretty big board to capture all of the brain states. So there is something that it is to initially capture those things on that board. Now, maybe if we replayed them later on, that would be the something that it is. It was like this when she gave birth, right? Her brain was like this, and maybe we could even capture that and replay it for other people in sort of a sci-fi sense, right? We could let people experience other people's experiences. And so that would be what it was like to be them. But at some point, there was a moment where there was that person giving birth. And so that sort of thought experiment doesn't trouble me particularly much.
Okay. Let me just approach it from a slightly different angle. Physical science prides itself on being totally objective. The more objective you can be in a science experiment, the better. You make no reference to yourself, how you're feeling, what you did. You describe impersonally, objectively, what you were doing in that experiment. And yet, the most precious facts to me are subjective. My subjective consciousness. And I would even say there are some facts about my consciousness that I know better and more certainly than any scientific fact. If I say I am in pain, it's something about which I cannot be mistaken.
I don't have the degree of certainty about my own personal knowledge that you have, William, and maybe you'll just think I'm a crackpot. That's fine. People think I'm a crackpot. It's okay. But I don't have the same degree of certainty about my personal knowledge that you do, I don't think. And the reason I don't is because my experience leads me to conclude that I can be wrong even about things that I experienced personally. So I'll give you an example. Back in 1986, when the Space Shuttle Columbia exploded, 90 seconds after takeoff or whatever it was, I have a very, very, very strong memory of being in the 8th grade at home sick the day that this happened. I was actually watching the Space Shuttle launch on TV. Here's the problem. I wasn't in the 8th grade in 1986. And so this personal fact, I can look up and I can find when the space shuttle exploded. I think
1986, I think it was, yeah.
Right. So I am completely wrong about the memory of being in the 8th grade while being right that the space shuttle exploded. And I've given this example on Still Unbelievable in the past. So I don't have the same degree of devotion to my personal experience, I think, that other people have, because even those sort of flashbulb memories are not perfectly reliable in my case.
Could you at this moment be mistaken if you were in severe pain?
Sure. Yes.
You wouldn't be sure if it was you. Go on. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I think I took the question to be, if I were in severe pain, could I be wrong about something else going on while I was in pain? That's not the question that you're asking. My apologies. Could I be wrong about being in severe pain?
But if your brain is telling you that you're experiencing pain, then it's hard to imagine any other criteria.
Right. So I think I could be wrong, for instance, about what was causing severe pain. I could be having some hallucination of a car accident and not actually be in a car accident. So, yes, I might not be wrong in the cosmic oatmeal cookie sense about being in extraordinary pain, but I could be wrong about the cause.
You're dodging about a little bit there, aren't you?
I don't think I am. I don't think I'm dodging at all. I think it's an uncomfortable truth that our brains are not particularly good at the kind of report that you're asking about, because we can hallucinate, because drug interactions can cause all sorts of things. Now, did I experience severe pain? I was willing to say yes to that. So I don't think I dodged that at all. But in the sense that you mean, could I be wrong about being in severe pain? I could be wrong about the cause. So let me ask you the question in reverse. Could you be wrong about what was causing severe pain if you were in it right now?
Oh, yes. I'm
Okay,
talking
so
about direct, conscious, personal experience. Not theorizing about the cause of things, just am I in pain? If I'm in pain, I can't be mistaken.
Okay, but what is pain though? Isn't it a nervous stroke chemical action in our brain to tell us something that is very, very wrong?
Is that the experience of pain you're talking about when you talk about something in your body?
Yes.
The first person experience.
Well, our brain is an information processor, isn't it? So it's got all these information inputs, and our experience is the response of all those inputs together being processed. So yes, it's the pain is our experience. I don't know how you could separate the two.
Well, you are committed to physicalism, materialism. Yeah?
Yes, I am.
And you also call it naturalism or whatever. And so we've got a view of the universe as being made up of fundamental particles, and we can study those. But there's something very curious about fundamental particles. Mm-hmm. They can have mass, they can have charge, but they have no size, which is quite an odd concept. Mm-hmm. And if you push fundamental physicists further and further as to what those particles are, they can talk about string theory and quantum field theory and so on. And as you get deeper and deeper, what it boils down to is that those fundamental particles and fields can only be described in terms of mathematics. It's almost as if the universe is made up of mathematics. There's no other way of describing those fundamental, what I regard as fundamental particles and fields, other than as mathematical objects.
I don't see how that gets away from physicalism, though.
Right, and you just talked about them entirely without mathematics.
Well, I'm not a particle physicist. I'm talking about...
Right, but we are having a conversation about them without math. That's my point.
Well, in a sense, okay, science is an endeavor that spans lots of disciplines and so on. In another sense, science is a system of symbols, of words, of algebraic symbols, of equations that are produced in order to try and describe or correspond to ultimate reality. You see, from my point of view, and this is where I differ, there's absolutely no reason to suppose that those mathematical things are fundamental any more than mind being fundamental. For me to talk about fundamental particles requires me to have a mind and consciousness. I can only talk about those things in the external world because I am conscious. So the most immediate fact to me is my own consciousness. The most immediate fact isn't particles in the external world. Do you get the difference in philosophical approach?
I do. I understand it, but I take the view that mind is what the brain does, which is something you'll have heard on other philosophy and science-based podcasts. So that's the position that I take, and I had what I was going to say then, but it's gone. So to use this is quite a poor analogy, but Andrew at least will understand it because we think the same. I'm a software developer by trade. That's what I do. So I'm on computers all the time. And I liken our brain to a CPU in a computer because it's got loads of inputs and it does its stuff, and it does its stuff by various rules of logic. And our brain has something similar because of its makeup. I don't know if my computer is conscious or not. All I know is I give it inputs and I get outputs resulting from the input. And it's pretty much the same with our brain. The outside world doesn't know that my brain experiences consciousness. It gives my brain inputs and it takes outputs as a result. That's a poor analogy. I think Andrew understood what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I've got I did. And it led me to a different question, or slightly. So, William, you said earlier that you fell in love with astronomy at an early age. I did too, probably not to the degree that you have. But one of the things that I accept from the field of astronomy is the age of the universe. And as far as I know, the very idea of mind, the fact that we are able to analyze the universe, leads me to accept that there was a time in the universe before there was human mind. And that fact, standing on its own, leads me to question the idea that mind must be the thing that is most fundamental, if you will, however we want to gloss that in this conversation. But if my mind can do anything rational, then I must surely accept that one of the rational conclusions that my mind delivers to me is the acceptance of astronomy and the conclusion that the universe was here before our minds were.
Okay.
See, that would never have bothered me as a Christian, Andrew.
No, well,
I don't know what my answer would have been, but I don't think it ever bothered me.
So it didn't bother me then either.
Can I just do a time check, Andrew? Have you got 10 minutes to go?
I do.
Okay.
And before I have to bail out, William, I don't remember a podcast in recent past where I have enjoyed someone as much as I have enjoyed being able to talk to you. Thank you.
All right.
I sincerely mean it.
Okay.
It's been provoking, thought-provoking already. So thank you.
Okay, it's been a pleasure talking to you chaps. You know, I look forward to it, and it's turned out to be good. Yes, thank you.
It has. I just to go back to the Darren quote that you did. I affirm the quote that Darren said, and I support it. And I would love to be able to defend it better. I feel like I haven't done a good enough job defending it as I should have been able to do. I think the mind issue is a challenge. I struggle with the concept of there being a consciousness that's separate to the physicality of our brain. And one of the evidences that I would use to support that is we can significantly alter our experience of consciousness by changing the chemical state within our brain. Pick a chemical: alcohol, nicotine, various drugs that you can buy from someone on a street corner, which I don't know the names of, any of those. And those will, all you're doing is changing the chemical composition, the chemical components within the brain, and you can significantly alter the conscious state. And for me, that's pretty much the kicker. For me, it's that knowledge that tells me that mind is brain, that consciousness is the result of the neurons and the chemical reactions within our brains. That's really the bottom line for me. So that experience needs to be broken down into a detail that I think scientifically we haven't got to yet, in order for me to begin to move over to what you're trying to propose.
It takes me back actually to when I was 22, and I was working in a chemical laboratory in Nottingham, and on the next bench was a qualified chemist. I, of course, wasn't then. And his name was Tony. He, for the first time, introduced me to how strange personal consciousness is. I am not a dualist in the traditional sense of the word, of thinking that there's some soul and there's the physical body as well. But I think I am, shall I call it, a cognitive dualist, in the sense that what I've said already, that science is rigorously objective, but there's something irreducibly subjective about human consciousness, irreducibly subjective. And so the two, while they live alongside each other and are correlated, there's something cognitively different about them. And what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness isn't nearly as hard as he implies.
Yes, a few people have said
it's
that.
Harder.
Yeah.
It's even harder.
Right, okay.
Gentlemen, I am at a dead end. I want to thank you both. Matthew, I envy you because you're going to get to finish this and I'm not going to. So
you're going to have to wait even longer for the special ending. Bad luck, dude.
It is. William, I hope you'll come back, because I would like to be able to chat some more. Thank you for being willing to come on.
Okay, Andrew, it's been great. Thank you.
It has. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. We'll talk soon.
All right. Cheers, Andrew.
Cheers.
You're definitely a gentleman, William. Thank you for the reach out. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a fabulous next birthday, whenever that is.
Oh, it's not till next March, actually. So
okay,
that's all
so
right.
you've got a long time to plan for it. Well, I hope it's spiffing.
One more thing, actually.
Go for it.
Since you've been such a gentleman, may I mention my book?
You can, yes. I'll make sure that there's links in the show notes if I can find it.
So last year I published a novel set in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And my central character is a teenager based on myself.
Cool.
I say based on, very different in many respects. But if you read that, it will give you a flavour of what it was like growing up in a fundamentalist evangelical Christian home at that time in the mid 20th century. Now, it's called No Deals, Mr. President.
No Deals, Mr. President.
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon by putting in that title in, or putting in my name, which is William Gretton.
Thank you very much. And I'll find that and I'll put links in the show notes. Listeners,
all right.
Show notes, you don't need to go and Google. Link in the show notes when I found it. And before I let you go and enjoy your tea or whatever it is you get up to at 9 o'clock on a weekday evening, William, normally we ask our Christian guests for a favourite Bible character, but you have given me a counter offer, which has left me very intrigued, and Andrew is going to miss for another 6 weeks while I edit this. Tell us what your response is.
Well, I pleaded, instead of trying to think of my favourite Bible character, if I could tell what I think is the most hilarious bit of the Bible, the most funny incident.
Go for it.
So it's in the book of Acts, and it's set at Ephesus when Paul was there. And here we go. It's only 4 verses. Some Jews who went around driving out evil spirits tried to invoke the name of the Lord Jesus over those who were demon possessed. They would say, in the name of Jesus, whom Paul preaches, I command you to come out. 7 sons of Sceva, a Jewish chief priest, were doing this. One day, the evil spirit answered them, Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you? Then the man who had the evil spirit jumped on them and overpowered them all. He gave them such a beating that they ran out of the house naked and bleeding. I think that's a fabulous one-liner. Jesus I know, Paul I know, but who are you?
But who are you? Yes. My mind went to the guys running out of the house naked and bleeding.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's all a great scene. Yes. Real Monty Python stuff.
Yes, actually, yes. He's not a caster out of evil spirits. He's a very naughty boy. Well, thank you, William. It's been a fun conversation. I'll echo Andrew's comments that we hope to have you back again. This episode will be ready in a few weeks' time. I'll drop you a note with all the details when that's ready. And dear listeners, until next time, be reasonable. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.